related to COVID have more than doubled since last week. It comes as two early studies suggest that people infected with the Omicron strain are less likely to need hospital treatment. Dr. Andrew Preston told GB News there's still many unknowns about the new variant.
It does appear, at least in the cases we've seen, as you've just stated, that you do have a reduced risk of ending up in hospital if you do catch Omicron. But on the flip side, you've got a far greater risk of catching it in the first place. So how those two balance out as it spreads through into the older population, those with comorbidities, we still just don't know, I'm afraid.
Meanwhile, Labour is calling for the government to act urgently to support the theatre industry. Shadow Culture Secretary Lucy Powell told GB News the government's insurance policy isn't robust enough.
The government's insurance scheme, a very expensive scheme that it set up many months ago for the live event sector, had that covered all aspects of potential sort of COVID interruption, not just the eventuality of a national lockdown. And many of these productions could have found themselves covered by insurance, which is what you would expect if a theatre show has to be cancelled due to an outbreak of a virus across the crew.
Scotland's Deputy First Minister says nightclubs will be closed in the country for at least 3 weeks from December the 27th. This comes on top of measures announced earlier this week by Nicola Sturgeon, which saw the return of additional restrictions. They include the requirement for 1 metre social distancing and a maximum capacity of 100 at a standing indoor event. The measures are thought to impact 150 clubs across the country. They now won't be able to operate without appropriate social distancing between groups and table service. Vladimir Putin says he doesn't want conflict with Ukraine, but the ball is in the West's court. The Russian president has called for unconditional security guarantees, including no further expansion of NATO eastward. He's been speaking at his annual news conference. It comes as Western powers fear Russia is preparing to invade Ukraine as early as the beginning of next year, which President Putin has denied. Children in England with peanut allergies will be the first in Europe to receive life-changing treatment. NHS England has secured a deal for the oral treatment Palforzia, which helps to reduce the severity of reaction to eating peanuts, including anaphylaxis. Up to 600 children aged 4 to 17 are expected to be treated this year. Currently, peanut allergies affect 1 in 50 children in the UK. 2 London tube lines are facing major disruption as staff plan strike action for 6 months from next year. The Transport Union says it'll take place every weekend on the Central and Victoria nighttime services. The RMT also say they'll consider broadening action if conditions aren't improved for drivers. Members of an organised crime group who stole thousands of pounds in a series of ram raid burglaries have been jailed. 5 men were sentenced after pleading guilty to conspiring to burgle 3 premises in Westminster last year. Officers were able to identify them by using evidence from CCTV, phone records and automated number plate recognition. UK car production saw its worst performance since 1984 last month, despite a surge in demand for electric vehicles. The Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders said November was the 5th consecutive month of decline. It dropped by 28.7%. British production of electric and hybrid cars took a record share, accounting for around a third of all cars made. Clarence House has confirmed the Prince of Wales and the Duchess of Cornwall will spend Christmas Day with the Queen at Windsor Castle. It'll be Her Majesty's first year without her husband Prince Philip, who died in April. Buckingham Palace has also announced that a service of thanksgiving for the life of the Duke of Edinburgh will take place next spring at Westminster Abbey. Well, that's all for now. I'll have the latest headlines for you in half an hour. Now it's back to the briefing and Darren.
Well, a very good afternoon. Welcome to the Briefing PM, your hour of all the latest political news, debate and analysis here on GB News. I'm Darren McCaffrey, and coming up in the next hour, we're going to be looking back at what has been a pretty momentous year in politics, from lockdowns to COP26 to Partygate, by-election losses and so much more. We'll be analysing the biggest political stories of 2021. Also, we'll be speaking to some pollsters about where the polls now are. The Prime Minister's support drifts and a surge in support for Keir Starmer, but will it hold out next year? And we'll be in Scotland to discuss a new report which raises serious concerns around a probe into MSP's behaviour. That and so much more. Some festive fun, hopefully, as well. As always, do get in touch. You know the email address by now, gbviews@gbnews.uk. You can tweet us at GBNews. And a very good afternoon. Welcome to the last briefing of 2021. I'm going to start today with some seemingly good news. At this stage of the Omicron wave, it is a good Christmas gift. It's the one that we could have hoped for. That is that the first studies into real-world hospitalisation data from Scotland and England suggest that Omicron does cause milder illness than the Delta variant. The good news is that this study, based at the University of Edinburgh, which covers the medical histories of 99% of the population of Scotland, finds that overall the risk of hospitalisation may be a whopping 56% lower compared to Delta. But, and it is a huge but, we still don't know whether this means we'll still see post-Christmas restrictions imposed in England or whether the NHS can cope under the strain. It's a decision which the Prime Minister will be wrestling with over the next coming days, with that continued speculation that Parliament could be recalled. Well, joining me to discuss this and the major political events of the year is the political commentator and reporter, Georgia Gihuli. Thank you, Georgia, for joining us. First of all, let's start with the news today, and it does tentatively seem to be quite positive.
Yeah, in terms of actual health, it's very positive. And also, we know anyway that the impact of Omicron was always going to be less than, say, Delta and other variants before that, because obviously most people in the UK are vaccinated, and also most people, sort of working age people, are at a low risk from COVID anyway. But anyway, this is good news. The problem is that sort of the people who've been calling for tighter restrictions throughout this, their argument is obviously that we don't know exactly how this could play out. Okay, that are things. So it could place some pressure on the NHS. The problem here, I think, is actually not the Omicron variant is really dangerous disease. Obviously, the evidence doesn't show that. I think that the issue is, with the NHS, we have a tremendous amount of pressure because it's sort of been mishandled over many years. There are staff shortages. It's already very much struggled to deal with past winter flu epidemics, that kind of thing. So I think that the issue is whether or not this is mild, will it still place pressure on the NHS?
Yeah, indeed. And of course, that is some of the factors the Prime Minister will be taking into account. But there is a sense, isn't it, that at the moment, looking at this data, provisional data, but still data, that Conservative MPs are not convinced for the need for further restrictions. And that essentially hems the Prime Minister in, doesn't it?
To a certain extent, it does. However, many of these MPs obviously did oppose the Plan B restrictions. However, before that, overwhelming majority of them supported other restrictions before that, because they were sort of persuaded that it was for the necessity of the NHS in particular. And also we know that Labour will probably support further restrictions, though Keir Starmer has actually not called for a post-Christmas lockdown or anything like that yet. So I think it's very interesting to see where we go, because on one hand, we could see sort of MPs pull together again and say, okay, we don't really like this, but let's do it because we feel that we need to, blah, 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 again. Or we could see actually Labour and backbench Tories be against it, which would be a very interesting place to be in.
Fascinating as well is, of course, that, England, yet again, a bit of an outlier in all of this compared to other parts of the UK, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, but also to other parts of Europe. Though, in essence, if things stay as optimistic as we frankly hope, this could be good political news for Boris Johnson, that he hasn't introduced restrictions when potentially they weren't necessary. Politically, it could be quite a good start to 2022 for the Prime Minister.
Yeah, I mean, my main concern is obviously what's good for the majority of the country rather than what's good for Boris Johnson. But I agree with you. Absolutely, it would probably be good for him in the long term if this does turn out to be mild, which it probably will, let's be realistic, and he hasn't implemented restrictions for no reason. However, it's funny because right now you do have sort of massive hordes of people in reality and, in the Twitterati, the Westminster bubble, calling for more restrictions. And actually polls show it's sort of like in the high 40% of the public, or adults rather, calling for further restrictions. So it's interesting to see. I think I doubt, the next election are going to be people. There's going to be people who are saying, let's say if Omicron was mild, saying, you should have implemented further restrictions anyway. So I think that is not going to be an issue. Yeah, if anything, it will be positive if they don't respond heavily when it's not necessary. However, the long-term impact of previous policies, we're already seeing them right now. Obviously, to an extent, it's a global issue with supply chains and interest rates and all that jazz. But we are seeing, in the UK, interest rates really soaring, the cost of living soaring. The problem is that obviously inflation's good when wages, but people's wages are not rising with that. So I think the economy is going to be a big issue in the next election. And I think that Boris and his ministers, obviously the Chancellor in particular, will face the heat for that. Whether or not, how they respond to this specific variant, I think is not as important as what's already happened.
No, indeed. And of course, it could inversely work the other way, which is that if hospitalisations do increase dramatically, many people may well ask questions about why in England the Prime Minister didn't react quicker. So it's finely balanced, to quote Boris Johnson himself. Georgia, just stay there for the time being, because you touched upon some of the big political challenges facing the Prime Minister. It has been a very, very interesting and frankly at times difficult year for Boris Johnson. We've had Partygate, we've had COP26, we've of course had the Omicron crisis and so much else. Let's have a little look back at some of the highlights and lowlights from 2021.
We must therefore go into a national lockdown which is tough enough to contain this variant. That means the government is once again instructing you to stay at home. You may only leave home for limited reasons permitted in law. We also know that if we were now to delay this fourth step, for instance to September or later, then we would be reopening as the weather gets colder and as the virus acquires a greater natural advantage.
His fictional party was a business meeting. And it was not socially distanced.
The Cabinet Secretary will conduct an inquiry into into what took place on December the 18th. As for other events that other dates that you mentioned, as far as I'm aware, to the best of my knowledge, we have followed the rules throughout. And
on this, I really think people should be prioritising those things and only those things that really matter to them, because otherwise the risk of someone getting infected at something that doesn't really matter to them and then not being able to do the things that do matter to them obviously goes up.
Amazing how your mind works, as in I'd almost forgotten about Matt Hancock and him being caught in the office. Let's bring Georgie back in again. What have your highlights and lowlights been?
I have to admit, a low light perhaps of today is now having to have rewatched again that clip of Matt Hancock. I don't know how you would say embroiled in an intimate exchange against a doorway. Gosh, I mean, in terms of the lowlights, possibly one of the first things you showed, which is something we obviously cannot blame British ministers for, the Capitol Hill riot or storm in Capitol, however you want to call it, in the US very, very early on in the year. I think this year's been so long, you always forget that happened this year. I think that it was just an absolute disaster. I mean, people obviously have very sort of divided opinions on, say, Donald Trump and Joe Biden, etc., and US politics in general. But I think that, the idea of this huge group of people invading basically the seat of the legislature in the United States of America, currently still the global superpower, the biggest democracy, the oldest democracy to some extent, trying to change or stop the results of an election, I think it was very sad to see. I do agree that the US obviously has some issues with voter fraud and mail-in ballots and that kind of thing, and things should always be pursued, legally and in a free way. However, I think what you saw here was some political actors sort of egging on these people to take action where I don't think it was appropriate to do so. The Congress in America as well, they're basically counting, verifying state votes. So these are votes that have been approved by the electoral colleges in the various states to verify Joe Biden's election as president. Congress doesn't decide the legal outcomes of whether there was voter fraud in this area or whether there was unfair antics in a certain area. So I think it's not even the appropriate place to protest, really. I'm assuming that the people who decided to go there, I think it's probably just a symbolic thing. Like, for example, you might protest outside the Houses of Parliament when it's not actually something that MPs would be involved with, just because it's sort of an iconic image of that city or of that country's system. So I'm assuming that's what it was. And, unfortunately, people were injured. People were sort of stuck inside, fearing for their lives. Actually, a few of the police officers who were involved in it committed suicide afterwards.
Yeah, and indeed, of course, there is an ongoing investigation, isn't it, by Congress into that. Georgia, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Merry Christmas to you and to your loved ones. Georgia Gahuli there joining us to look back on some of the highlights and lowlights of the year. Let's stay, though, with the latest political news, particularly around the variants and the action the government is taking, because Labour are demanding more urgent action from the government to prevent the demise of the theatre sector. Labour's calling on the government to support the arts sector, including widening eligibility for the Cultural Recovery Fund, warning many treasured theatres face collapse without support. The call on the government follows an announcement from Chancellor Rishi Sunak earlier this week that £30 million should have been added to the CRF, I should say. However, Labour says more needs to be done. Here is Lucy Powell.
Not a huge amount of money, this £30 million pot that they put in, but they need to ensure that very quickly that gets to the our treasured institutions, our theatres, our orchestras, our music venues, right across the country, gets to them quickly and is open to individuals, so that freelancers for whom Christmas is often their boomtown of year, you can also access these funds as well. And we're all closely following these data points, aren't we, very, very closely. And I would say it is a fine judgment. I don't think we've been calling for more measures. What we've been calling for is more clarity, so that people know what the data points are and when that information might start to come available and what actions would follow or wouldn't follow. I don't think that's beyond the realms of what people can expect. So businesses who are trying to plan for a very busy New Year period, for example, people who are planning on travelling, the travel industry, people who've got plans to see family and friends. I don't think it's beyond the realms of the government to be able to say, these are the sorts of data points, these are the kind of criteria that we're looking at that change this very finely balanced situation. And I agree, it is a finely balanced situation. That will change it one way or the other. And these are the times that we're going to review that. And these are the consequences that would flow. A bit like last year when we had the roadmap. You remember the roadmap coming out. We had dates, we had criteria, we knew what potentially was coming when. And obviously this is a faster moving situation, but you could have a faster timetable if necessary. But at the moment, it's just a sort of stab in the dark, isn't it? And I think that the fear is that the Prime Minister has sort of lost his authority to be able to take the country with him on such a plan. And he can't actually take his own backbenchers with him either. So that's the issue, really. What I would like to know, what we don't have as an official opposition and what the public don't have either, is what are all of those data points, not just from a public health point of view. So what kind of level of hospitalisations would be a cause of concern? What kind of hospitalisations of those who are vaccinated as opposed to unvaccinated? Data that we don't have access to. What kind of data point do we need to have about the severity of Omicron and so on versus Delta? What kind of level of infections? What are the range of data points that the government is looking at, as well as the economic impacts, as well as the mental health impacts and all of those things? What is it that they're going to make their assessment based on? I don't think that's a difficult question to ask them, so that then we're all clear as well about what these decisions are being based on, rather than just a kind of, it's just a feeling, we've had a kind of political discussion and I'm not sure I can take my cabinet with me or not. I think that's the fear, that this is it's in that realm rather than in a realm of here are a range of issues that we're looking at, and here's what we need to see in order for us not to go into further restrictions, or here's what we need to see that unfortunately will mean further restrictions, and what would those restrictions be and when might they come in?
That was Labour's Lucy Powell speaking a little bit earlier here on GBNews. A lot of people tweeting about my jumper, trying to make us feel a little bit festive on this Christmas Eve. Lots of people asking where it's from. It's from the House of Commons shop, and I think it's available to everyone. You just log online and you can order yourself one if you really want to. OK, we're going to pause there on GB News and the briefing. We're going to be back, though, in a couple of minutes. We're going to look at some of the restrictions in Northern Ireland and elsewhere around the UK, due to come into force, of course, after Christmas Day itself. But before that, here's the weather. Looking a bit miserable.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. Outbreaks of rain and hail snow will affect the far north of Scotland overnight. Much milder elsewhere and fairly foggy in places, whether that's hill fog or low-level fog by the start of Christmas Eve. You can see the mild air across much of the UK, but cold air continues in the far north of Scotland, and with these weather fronts bringing spells of rain from the southwest, well, they're going to increasingly mix with the cold air, and so the snow level coming down through the night across northern parts of Scotland. Expect accumulating snow above 300 metres, 2 to 5 centimetres possible, and 10 centimetres above 500 metres. So watch out if you're travelling on some of the higher routes in northern Scotland on Christmas Eve morning. Otherwise, some dense fog to look out for first thing across central parts of the UK, and a lot of cloud, low cloud covering the hills as well. Some damp weather there for northern England, much of Scotland, but it does peter out. Whilst another active band of rain moves in through the afternoon, southwest England into Wales, central southern England, Northern Ireland later on. That is accompanied by gusty winds. Mild air in the south, staying cold further north. And it's a repeating pattern over the next few days. We've got these active weather fronts moving in, and then they stall and fizzle out across central parts of the UK. They mix with the cold air further north, so don't be surprised if there's a few flakes of snow over the tops of the Pennines as we head into Christmas Day. But Christmas Day promises a cold start, a bright start across northern and central Scotland. Some sunshine here. Further south, a lot of cloud. That cloud again covering the hills, and a few flakes of snow possible for the higher ground of northern England. But it's much milder for Wales, southern and southwest England, and here we'll see showers and longer spells of rain with temperatures up to 12 Celsius. Similar on Sunday, showers and mild air in the south, cold further north with some hill snow.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK, the world, and our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We're here for you. Don't forget to join our community by hitting the subscribe button.
And download the GB News app so you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
A very welcome back to the briefing on this Thursday afternoon, Christmas Eve. Christmas, of course, on Saturday. Thank you for your company. The time coming up to 3:30. Learned today from the Office of National Statistics that COVID infections were at the highest since records began in the week ending December 16th. 1 in 45 people across the country had COVID. Of course, we saw 106,000 cases yesterday, but there will be no new restrictions in England before Christmas, though it does not mean, of course, that there could be restrictions after Christmas, with the Prime Minister due to make that decision in the coming days. In Scotland, however, nightclubs are going to close for 3 weeks from December 27th. And business leaders in Northern Ireland are pretty angry about the country's new COVID restrictions. They've branded them unacceptable and unforgivable. Stormont ministers announced yesterday that nightclubs will also close there from Boxing Day after its highest daily increase in coronavirus cases was recorded. Well, our Northern Ireland reporter, Dougie Beattie, has the latest from Northern Ireland.
This intervention is informed by the medical and scientific advice, and it takes account of the wider economic and societal impacts. So from the 27th of December, we are asking people to limit mixing to a maximum of 3 households. There'll be guidance in terms of emphasising the importance of working from home where possible, and that's going to be strengthened. There will be a legal requirement for businesses to take reasonable measures to achieve 2 metre social distancing in office spaces or where that cannot be achieved to provide alternative mitigations. We will be encouraging regular workplace testing, and that's going to be strongly encouraged. The requirements around face coverings will be strengthened. There will be a legal duty on businesses to take all reasonable steps to minimise the transmission of COVID. There will be a requirement to be seated in indoor hospitality venues, and a maximum of 6 people can be seated together in an indoor hospitality venue. And from 6 a.m. on the 26th of December, nightclubs will be closed. Indoor dancing and indoor standing events will not be allowed.
Michelle O'Neill, the Deputy First Minister, spelling out the new regulations. Nightclubs have been open for just 7 weeks, after being closed for 87. The hospitality sector has took the financial hit once more, but just how bad is it?
Pre-COVID, we're Northern Ireland's 4th largest private sector employer. By a third of all Northern agri-food, account for 2/3 of tourism spend. Today, we estimate just in the Christmas period alone, our industry has lost between 250 to 300 million. That's the money that carries us through January and February. We are officially open, but effectively closed.
It's just not hotels and bars that will suffer. The supply chain is vast and planning for pricing essential.
Well, my job as I own and run this business is we've got to set plans. We think about how we're going to sell in the next 12 months or the next 3 years. So we're used to that. So the constant stop-start nature of the last 22 months has been so difficult for me. It's been really difficult for my 650 staff, but also my 4,000 customers, as they've had to stock up, lose stock, and it's the in-out, stop-start nature I think has been the hardest. But I think we all thought we were going to have a good Christmas this year, and I think what has happened in the last few weeks has been so frustrating because we have not been given any insight, any knowledge, any help or understanding as to what's going to happen. We've stocked up, so we've got a much higher stock holding due to the realities of supply chain, due to the realities of Brexit, and Christmas hasn't happened this year. But I feel sorry for my customers who have bookings made, you know, planning to have big parties, big gatherings in the last few days in terms of their restaurants or their hotels, and they've just been obliterated with sales, with no knowledge of what's coming next, no grants for them, and just fear. I think that's been, fear and frustration, I think, have been the key things. They've been phoning me saying, Andrew, what are you hearing? So it's that unknown that I think is so difficult for our customers. We've been here time and again, last March, last kind of winter, then again in January, then again the summer. Regulations have chopped and changed, and that is very difficult for the hospitality industry.
The hospitality sector believes that you have closed them by stealth because you haven't got the money to actually replace it. What do you say to those people in the hospitality sector that have took such a financial hit? And what do you say, more importantly, to the staff in it, that for Christmas they've basically been handed a P45?
Well, we have pressed for a wage subsidy scheme, and we want that, but we need the UK government to introduce that scheme. It was there in the past. We believe that hospitality has a particular requirement for that.
It is the workers that are going to feel the impact in terms of the decisions that have had to be taken, necessary because of the pandemic. So the Treasury should reinstate furlough immediately and allow us to reach to that to be able to support workers through this trying time.
With no plans in place, the private sector are frustrated and hope that the government will have some forward thinking.
I think what we've got to do is get away from a battle that seems to have been raging about health versus the economy. They need to come together, and I think we would like more recognition that the private sector has a huge role to play here in Northern Ireland. We'd love to see much more inward investment and trying to grow jobs. Look, the health service has done an incredible job under incredibly difficult circumstances, but so have my lorry drivers, so have my staff in my food outlets, and lots of other hospitality industries who've kept people fed and watered throughout this pandemic. I think we need better long-term thinking, and we need government to make those tough decisions.
Douglas Beattie, GB News, Stormont.
A picture that unfortunately, of course, has been painted right across the UK, not just in Northern Ireland. OK, it's just after 3:30. Let's bring you up to date with the latest news headlines from Jasmine.
Darren, thank you. An estimated 1.4 million people had coronavirus in the UK in the week to last Friday, according to the Office for National Statistics. Meanwhile, new figures show the number of NHS staff absences in London related to COVID have more than doubled since last week. It comes as two early studies suggest that people infected with the Omicron strain are less likely to need hospital treatment. Scotland's Deputy First Minister says nightclubs will be closed in the country for at least 3 weeks from December the 27th. This comes on top of measures announced earlier this week by Nicola Sturgeon, which saw the return of additional restrictions. They include the requirement for 1 metre social distancing and a maximum capacity of 100 at a standing indoor event. The measures are thought to impact 150 clubs across the country. Hundreds of mourners have paid their respects to a 12-year-old girl who was stabbed to death in Liverpool last month. Ava White was killed after a Christmas light switch on in the city centre. Police said she died from catastrophic injuries. Clarence House has confirmed the Prince of Wales and the Duchess of Cornwall will spend Christmas Day with the Queen. Her Majesty will spend the festivities at Windsor Castle for a second year and not travel to Sandringham, as is tradition. Buckingham Palace has also announced that a service of thanksgiving for the life of the Duke of Edinburgh will take place next spring at Westminster Abbey. Well, those are the headlines. We'll have a full update for you at the top of the hour.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back to the briefing here on GB News. Now, given recent events, it may come as little surprise that a majority of UK adults think it is likely that Boris Johnson will not be Prime Minister by the end of 2022. 6 in 10 predicts this, compared with just a quarter who think it is unlikely. Even 58% of 2019 Conservative voters think he will have left by this time next year. In comparison, opinions are split when it comes to Sir Keir Starmer's position as leader of the Labour Party, with 38% thinking that he will not hold the position by the end of the year, while 2019 Labour supporters are also split. 39% think he will have left, but exactly the same proportion say that that is unlikely. So who's up, who's down? What potentially could we see in 2022? Well, here to discuss this from Ipsos Mori is the Chief Executive, Kelly Beaver. Very good afternoon to you, Kelly. First of all, we have seen big substantial changes in polling, haven't we, for both Keir Starmer and the Prime Minister this past year?
That's right. Really, the big changes have been as a fall from that March glow that the Prime Minister was experiencing as a result of the vaccine bounce. And then when we hit around September time and some of the sort of build from the allegations that were coming through about various things around sleaze, lack of trust, etc., and we started to see both Boris Johnson's personal ratings and also support for the Conservative Party fall over the autumn, up until the point of our recent December political monitor, where for the first time Labour had more support than the Conservative Party government. But it is worth reflecting that in a mid-term perspective, when we look back over various governments, the Conservative Party are in and where you would sort of expect a governing party to be at the mid-term point. It's just they did have that very significant vaccine bounce back in March of this year.
Yeah, indeed. And Kelly, as we well know, politics obviously changes pretty quickly these days. But in essence, there does seem to have been, on a personal level, away from the government itself, a shift in public perception of specifically Boris Johnson.
That's right. We do rate both Boris Johnson, Keir Starmer and a number of other politicians against a set of characteristics. And some of the characteristics for Boris Johnson, like the integrity with which he holds himself, being able to be good in a crisis, all of those things where he did particularly being good in a crisis, where he was doing particularly well. In the last couple of months, we've really seen that start to decline as well. And you mentioned our predictions poll, which we do each year, having a look at how the British public are feeling about the year ahead. And whilst we don't always get it right, I think that sort of 6 in 10 thinking that Boris Johnson will be PM at the end of 2022 gives you a real sense of the mood of the nation when it comes to him personally at this point in time.
What's been the motivator, Kelly, do we know, when it comes to kind of changing public attitudes? Are there kind of policy issues or character issues that have kind of come to the fore?
Well, there will be all of those things, but also we need to bear in mind the broad context in which people are viewing the government at the minute. So yes, it will be personal conduct, how they feel about some of the allegations like the Christmas party piece. They have actually, where I would normally come on and say those things haven't made a difference, we have seen that make a difference in the way government, Boris Johnson in particular, has been polling. But there's the broader mood of the nation, how people feel about is the country going in the right or wrong direction, how they feel about their own personal finance. All of that kind of stuff plays into how they feel about the governing party of the time. And certainly the mood of the nation at the minute, as we come into a Christmas period where we are facing challenges, shall we say, I think the mood of the nation is not as optimistic as we might have hoped for this time of year.
And Kelly, just away from the two major parties, because the Liberal Democrats have won 2 by-elections this year, turning over big Conservative majorities, yet naturally in the polls they don't seem to have made much of an impact. Same could be said for the Greens and the Reform Party.
Yes, it really is a two-party race still, very much so, Conservatives and Labour. But we did actually see the Greens come ahead in the most recent Political Monitor poll, but we think that was purely down to, or largely down to, the COP26 effect, where that had been so highly publicised in the news that it gave the Green Party a bit more of a push in the volume of support that they were experiencing from the British public. But yes, I think your point's well made.
And just very finally, if we can kind of looking at a crystal ball, and these things are always quite difficult, you're right in saying it is only mid-term. And the problem for the Labour Party really is, without significant changes in Scotland, trying to overturn an 80-seat Conservative majority is just so difficult, isn't it, at any election? I think the swing needed would be of historic proportions almost.
It would, and I think bear in mind some of the challenges the Conservative Party government and Boris Johnson have been through recently, and even then we're only seeing a marginal gain for the Labour Party when we do our voting intention polls. Keir Starmer is not polling particularly well. He is doing better than Boris Johnson, but then that is at the minute a fairly low bar. And then we have, as I say, the midterm point, and the majority of the government's reign to date has been in a COVID time. They still have to prove themselves on a number of their 2019 manifesto pledges, and they haven't got that long to make some quite sizable change happen in line with policies like the Levelling Up agenda, for example. So they have quite a lot to do, and we're certainly not out of this pandemic yet either.
Kelly, appreciate your thoughts. Kelly Beaver there, who is the Chief Executive of Ipsos Mori. Merry Christmas to you and your loved ones.
Merry Christmas.
Peaceful, festive fun, and stay safe. There you go, Kelly Beaver joining us. Well, let's turn our attention now to Scotland, where there are apparently serious failings in the way the body which investigates complaints about behaviour of MSPs and councillors is run. That's according to auditors. The Commissioner for Ethical Standards in Public Life in Scotland deals with hundreds of complaints against elected members each year. But Audit Scotland found a disturbing number of failings at the watchdog, with too many submissions dismissed. It said that every probe running since August 2020 now should be independently reviewed. Well, joining me to discuss this and lots more is the political commentator James Bunday. James, a very good afternoon to you. Just give us a bit more detail about this report from the Commissioner for Ethical Standards in Public Life.
Yeah, so the Commission released a report earlier this year saying that because of staff shortages, COVID, high staff turnover, it resulted in these investigations not taking place at the rate that they should be taking, and that's resulted in a backlog. And with more complaints than ever, this has meant that MSPs and councillors are not being investigated for potential wrongdoings. Audit Scotland then, investigating the Commission on Ethical Standards, said that this backlog and this lack of investigation is going to lead to a breakdown in trust that the public have in the Commission for Ethical Standards. And for the sake of democracy in Scotland, that is very worrying. MSPs and councillors should be held to account, and that means investigating when there's potential wrongdoing.
Well, I mean, what jumps out to me, James, about this story, or seems kind of extraordinary, is that there were hundreds of complaints made against elected officials or members every year in Scotland. I mean, what type of complaints are we talking about?
They vary. Some more extreme, so money, some behaviour on social media, and so on. There doesn't seem to be a generic pattern of any specific type of behaviour. But it does show you that there is concerns that members of the public have about the behaviour of elected officials in Scotland. And I think that speaks a lot about the culture that the Scottish Government actually has. I do think that the SNP government is getting increasingly complacent, and they think that there's a sense of invincibility, that they can get away with things that most governments shouldn't get away with. And I think that feeling is coming across in people complaining about their MSPs and councillors.
James, if we move away from that story just to wider Scottish politics, if you don't mind, what is the perception of Nicola Sturgeon's moves in recent days with greater restrictions after Christmas? We know she's always taken a more cautious approach than Westminster. I mean, the SNP have been pretty popular this year, essentially winning that election back in May. Where are we at now with kind of Scottish public opinion, if you like?
I think this has been the straw that's broke the camel's back. People who have usually been supportive of the SNP have been quite critical of the new COVID restrictions that have been announced. At the football last night, football fans being banned, 500 limit in attendance as of Boxing Day, football fans and teams more supportive of the SNP had banners telling them language that you can't use on the television, but basically the feeling is strong. People also saying that they're not going to take the booster vaccination because what was the point? We wanted to have vaccine passports to get into nightclubs, to get into football stadiums, and now these obviously don't work because we can't get into any in a few days' time. So it's undermining the need, or undermining the campaign to get people boosted with their vaccine. And that is very worrying, because the booster vaccine and the vaccination rollout is how we're going to get normality back. And I think the Scottish Government have completely miscalculated to the testimony of public health in Scotland.
OK, James, really appreciate your time. Merry Christmas to you as well. James Bundy there joining us
Merry
from
Christmas,
Scotland with the latest on that investigation, but also wider Scottish politics. New statistics coming in that probably not going to surprise everyone, or anyone, I should say, that restaurants have seen the poorest week in terms of footfall, according to the Office for National Statistics, since the spring. According to the latest weekly updates, the number of seated diners fell 14% in the week to December 20th. Often, of course, the run up to Christmas is the busiest and most profitable time for restaurants. This is 88% of the levels that we saw in the equivalent week last year, and it's the weakest level since May of this year. So clearly an awful lot of pressure on restaurateurs, though the Chancellor and the government would argue that that £1 billion worth of financing was announced this week will help support them. But still, it is, of course, disappointing to see restaurants, bars, other hospitality venues bearing the brunt of what has happened in the last couple of weeks. Always get in touch, particularly if you've been affected by any of this, at gbviews at gbnews.uk, or you can tweet us at gbnews. Now, we're having a bit of a look back, aren't we, as this is the last briefing of the year, and we've been looking at some of the big issues, not least of all COP26, only a couple of months ago. Seems like it may well have been a lifetime ago, but it was a significant moment in Glasgow in November, with world leaders stating that the summit was the last chance to prevent catastrophic climate change. We're asking the question, was COP26 a success or a failure? And joining me to discuss this is Simon West of the World Forest Organization and Harry Wilkinson, Head of Policy at Net Zero Watch. A very good afternoon to both of you gentlemen. Thank you for joining us. I think, first of all, let's start with you, Simon. What did you make of what happened at COP26? Was it a big success from your point of view?
Success. I think there were successes. The fact that an agreement was reached was a very good thing. The issue is that the agreement was very much watered down from what everybody would have liked to have seen. So, no, it wasn't a success in those terms. I think we would have loved to have seen the government specifically mention fossil fuels in a bid to get to net zero, to reduce them to zero, not just to stop supporting them with uneconomic finances, which I think was it was a very poor statement. We would have loved it to be much stronger than that.
What do you make of this in many regards? That announcement on, as you say, not necessarily committing to net zero, and Harry, that's something that you guys are focused on. I mean, that commitment is decades down the line. Many people were calling for action in the years to come. Harry?
Oh, that's for me. Well, I would agree that COP26 wasn't a success, but I'm afraid for quite different reasons. I think what we saw was a lot of pledge making that was quite out of touch with the reality of what can be delivered. And at the end of the conference, what we saw was a strange debate going on about whether we should phase out coal or phase down coal. And the UK president and many of the parties involved were very keen to be able to say we're going to phase out coal, but they were unable to secure that commitment. With China and India, I think, recognizing the reality that actually that wasn't going to be possible. We would still need to rely on fossil fuels for many decades to come. And so there was a disconnect between the fantasy and the reality. And therefore, we saw Alok Sharma, unfortunately, crying at the end of the conference, I think recognizing that he hadn't quite got what he was hoping for.
But in some ways, Harry, this is a kind of incremental process, isn't it, to a degree? And there is a sense that kind of the public mood or public opinion on the issue of climate change has changed quite dramatically over the last 12 months, certainly here in the UK.
Well, the government has just assumed that everyone is with it on its net zero agenda. But we've just released some polling today here at Net Zero Watch, which actually said 70% of people were concerned about the financial impact of rising energy prices at Christmas this year. 58% said they were not willing to actually pay any more in taxes to support net zero. And 65% said they hadn't been given enough of a say on net zero. So actually, I think that's really going to be tested. As we see energy prices skyrocket, people will really question whether the government's priority should be on net zero or whether it should be on actually getting bills down, protecting struggling families who will really find it very hard to pay these increased bills.
Simon, just finally for you, you said it wasn't an absolute success, COP26. Looking ahead, there's going to be a COP27, isn't there? How long is this process going to take where someone like you would be happy with the outcome?
I think that there are going to be lots more COPs, and they're going to continue talking the way they are. For me, the big takeaway from COP26 is that governments are not going to do it for us. We have to educate people to have their own choices and to make the right choices for the planet. And yeah, I absolutely agree that energy bills have skyrocketed. Harry, you're right. It is a major concern for people. And I personally think the way to tackle that is to have far more renewable energy, to have far more diverse energy systems, not to be reliant on gas coming from Russia, but to generate our own electricity, to move wherever we can towards electric heating. As far as we can do that, it's very difficult to replace a gas boiler with an air source heat pump, but we can do it if we have the political will, if we have the support.
Okay, Simon and Harry, appreciate your time. Merry Christmas to you both. Have a good one. Let's stay warm.
Merry Christmas back to you.
Take care. Thanks very much. Okay, well, that is it for the briefing for today. Lots of people have been getting in touch. Ian and Simon and Sue asking where my jumper is from. Go on the parliamentary website. You can order one for yourself. That is it for the briefing for this year. Thank you for your company over the last couple of months. We'll be back in January at the same time of 3. But from me and all the team, all I can say is have a very, very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Take care.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. Outbreaks of rain and hill snow will affect the far north of Scotland overnight, much milder elsewhere, and fairly foggy in places, whether that's hill fog or low-level fog by the start of Christmas Eve. You can see the mild air across much of the UK, but cold air continues in the far north of Scotland, and with these weather fronts bringing spells of rain from the southwest, well, they're going to increasingly mix with the cold air, and so the snow level coming down through the night across northern parts of Scotland. Expect accumulating snow above 300 metres, 2 to 5 centimetres possible, and 10 centimetres above 500 metres. So watch out if you're travelling on some of the higher routes in northern Scotland on Christmas Eve morning. Otherwise, some dense fog to look out for first thing across central parts of the UK, and a lot of cloud, low cloud covering the hills as well. Some damp weather there for northern England, much of Scotland, but it does peter out. Whilst another active band of rain moves in through the afternoon, southwest England into Wales, central southern England, Northern Ireland later on. That is accompanied by gusty winds. Mild air in the south, staying cold further north. And it's a repeating pattern over the next few days. We've got these active weather fronts moving in, and then they stall and fizzle out across central parts of the UK. They mix with the cold air further north, so don't be surprised if there's a few flakes of snow over the tops of the Pennines as we head into Christmas Day. But Christmas Day promises a cold start, a bright start across northern and central Scotland, some sunshine here. Further south, a lot of cloud, that cloud again covering the hills, and a few flakes of snow possible for the higher ground of northern England. But it's much milder for Wales, southern and southwest England, and here we'll see showers and longer spells of rain with temperatures up to 12 Celsius. Similar on Sunday, showers and mild air in the south, cold further north with some hill snow.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show, Farage, 7 p.m.